What if some of the most ancient stories we have aren't just stories at all? What if they're actually blueprints? Precise, repeatable, step-by-step guides for how an entire society can completely unravel. Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into, because we are about to decode one of the most powerful examples of systemic collapse you'll ever find.
So the story ends right here. A rain of stones, a total system failure. Now that sounds pretty dramatic, almost like some random, out-of-the-blue punishment, right? But here's the thing. When you look closer at the source material, you see this isn't random at all. In fact, it's the completely logical, inevitable final step in a very specific and very predictable three-stage process.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're asking in this explainer. Is this just a one-off story from the past? Or could it be something more? Could we actually reverse engineer this narrative to find a diagnostic tool? A kind of timeless pattern that reveals exactly how any society, at any time, plants the seeds of its own downfall.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at the system's core code, its basic operating system, you could say. Then we'll walk through the three fatal stages. First, crossing a line. Second, totally redefining morality. And third, kicking out the truth itself. And finally, we'll see what that inevitable consequence really looks like.
Okay, so let's get into it. The specific narrative we're pulling from is in Surah Al-Araf about the people of Lut, but I want to be super clear. We're not looking at this as just a history lesson. Think of it more like a case study, a diagnostic manual for what happens when a society starts to rot from the inside out.
So, before you can figure out why a machine broke, you gotta know how it's supposed to work in the first place, right? Same idea here. Before we can diagnose the collapse, we need to understand the system's fundamental code, its underlying operating system. What are the basic rules of the game according to the source?
The source seems to describe this core structure, which we can call the 237 Mizan framework. Now, don't get hung up on the name. Just think of it like the basic physics of this world. It breaks down like this. Everything starts with a duality, a choice between two things. That's the two. Life itself is presented as a test of knowledge, the 3. And everything, every action, leads to a final completion or return, the 7. So you have creation, you have a test, and you have a return. Simple as that.
Okay, next up is a really crucial concept, the ẓālim. The easiest way to think about this is like a tripwire built into the system. It's a non-negotiable boundary, a hard line. It's what separates order from chaos. And if you cross it, well, it forces a choice and triggers a major, built-in response from the entire system.
So why does this tripwire, the ẓālimīn, even exist? Well, it's there to act as a buffer between two fundamental forces. On one side, you've got light. Think of this as timeless truth, the fixed, unchanging principles. On the other side, you've got sound, which is all about the flow of time, mercy, and the temporal world. The ẓālimīn is that essential boundary that's supposed to keep these two in a healthy balance. And the whole story we're about to unpack, it's about what happens when a society decides to just smash that boundary to pieces.
All right, so we've got our basic framework. Now, let's start the diagnosis. We're going to apply this model to the story of Lut's people and see exactly how things started to go wrong. Let's look at stage 1.
And here it is, stage 1. This is that first, critical step, the one that starts the whole domino effect. This is where a community starts to break its own foundational rules. The first stage is actually pretty straightforward, but it's absolutely crucial. It's boundary violation. The community makes a conscious, deliberate choice to step over a line that they know is there. It's a clear act of law-breaking, a willful transgression against the system's own defined limits.
Now you might think, okay, so they broke a rule. Big deal. And you'd be right. A society doesn't collapse just because people break laws. It's what happens next that's the real danger zone. So let's move on to stage 2, because this is where things get systemic.
Okay, stage 2. This is the real pivot point. This is where simple law-breaking starts to metastasize like a cancer into something way, way more dangerous. The act of creating entirely new laws.
And the source material is really specific about this. It says this wasn't just any old sin. It was something new, a kind of moral innovation. Something so far out there that it's described as being totally unprecedented. Nobody had ever done this before.
And this is the key insight for stage 2. The society goes from simply breaking the law to actively making a new one to fit their desires. The transgression isn't just a sin some people commit anymore. Oh no. It gets systematized. It gets normalized. It's defended as a new social standard, maybe even a right. This is when the corruption becomes institutionalized.
So where do you go from there? Well, that brings us to the final and absolutely fatal stage. This is the moment a society doesn't just embrace its new standard, it turns aggressively against the original one. And folks, this is the point of no return.
And here we are, stage 3. This is when the system just completely locks down. It enters a state of what you could call cognitive closure. Basically, its mind is made up, and in doing that, it seals its own fate. Now pay close attention to this response. It's unbelievable. The messenger comes and says, hey, let's get back to the way things should be. And what do they say? They mock him and his followers by saying, oh, look at them. They're trying to be so pure. Think about that. Purity itself has become the crime. It's a total 180-degree inversion of values.
This right here, this is the moment they pass through, what we called the Razum Gate. That tripwire is sprung. The system is now in terminal decline. It's not even a debate about right and wrong anymore. The very idea of good has been redefined as a threat, a kind of social pollutant. And that corrective voice? It's not just being ignored now, it's being actively targeted for removal.
And this is the final action, binary expulsion. It's a simple, terrifying choice. The society identifies the last remaining voice of truth as a contaminant that has to be physically kicked out. And by doing that, they literally sever their last lifeline to their own moral foundation. There's no internal correction mechanism left. None.
So once you hit the end of stage 3, what happens next isn't some arbitrary punishment from the sky. It's the system's own logical conclusion. It's almost like a law of physics at this point.
So let's just recap the blueprint real quick. 1. You violate the limits. 2. You redefine morality to make it okay. And 3. You expel anyone who reminds you of the original truth. Once those 3 things are done, system collapse isn't just possible, it's guaranteed.
This table really lays it all out perfectly. You start with simple law-breaking, violating the rules. Then you graduate to lawmaking, turning that violation into the new normal. And the final step? Inverted law enforcing, where you actively punish the original standard of goodness. So when a system literally kicks out its own mercy and truth, what's left? Only the corruption. That rain of stones we started with is just the natural outcome. It's the whole rotten structure finally collapsing under its own weight.
And that brings us to the final and maybe most important question. If this 3-stage process isn't just an ancient story, if it's a repeatable pattern, a kind of social and spiritual law, if it's a diagnostic tool for figuring out if a system is on the brink of collapse, what patterns does it help you see in the world around us today?